Like, I was finally feeling like I was in a good place in life. I had a great husband, a beautiful daughter, and my family was coming to celebrate with me. We rented this gorgeous villa in the countryside with a big pool, lots of space, and it was just perfect for the kind of vibe I wanted. Naturally, I invited my best friend, Alex. We've known each other since high school and had been through everything together. He's practically like family to me. So when I invited him, I also told him to bring his son, Jeremy. Jeremy's 22 now, and we've watched him grow up over the years. It felt right to include him, especially since I knew Alex had been spending a lot of time with his son lately. Plus, the more, the merrier, right? I wasn't really thinking much beyond that. We'd all just hang out, have some drinks, enjoy the villa, and make it a good day. So, the day of the party comes, and everything's going smoothly. Alex and Jeremy arrive, and Jeremy's grown up a lot since the last time I saw him. Like, he was always a cute kid, but now, he's just, well, let's say it's obvious he's not a kid anymore. He's tall, athletic, and just seems way more mature than the last time I saw him. He was helping his dad carry stuff inside, cracking jokes, and he gave me a hug that lasted a little longer than expected. I brushed it off. He's just friendly, right? The party itself starts off fun. The kids are playing around the pool, the adults are lounging with drinks, and everything feels perfect. My parents are sitting on the porch, and my husband's flipping burgers on the grill. Alex is being his usual charming self, laughing and reminiscing about old times. It was one of those days where you just feel like everything is right in the world. But then things started getting weird. After a few hours, I realized I was getting hot and sweaty from being outside all day. I had planned a fancier evening event later, with more guests arriving, so I figured I'd go inside, freshen up, and change into something a little more elegant for the night. I told everyone I'd be back in a bit and went upstairs to the master bathroom. I locked the door, not thinking much of it, and hopped in the shower. It was one of those luxurious walk-in showers with glass doors and a view of the garden from a window just off to the side. I hadn't even noticed that the window was cracked open slightly. The warm water felt amazing, and I just took a minute to relax, not really paying attention to anything else. But then, I felt this strange sensation, like someone was watching me. I looked over towards the window, and for a split second, I thought I saw someone. My heart skipped a beat, but I convinced myself I was just imagining things. Who would be creeping around a window? It's not like there were any strangers at the party. It was all family and close friends. I brushed it off again and continued my shower. That's when I heard it. The unmistakable sound of the bathroom door creaking open. I froze. Before I could react, I saw Jeremy standing there, just inside the doorway. My mind raced. What the hell was he doing in here? I was about to yell at him when he stepped closer, his face looking both nervous and conflicted, like he wasn't sure what to say either. He stammered something about needing to use the bathroom, but we both knew that wasn't the case. My heart was pounding, and I could feel a mix of shock, confusion, and something else I couldn't quite put my finger on. I didn't move. He stood there for a second longer, eyes locked on mine, and then, without thinking, he took a step closer. I should have screamed, told him to leave, but instead, I stayed still. It was all so sudden. One moment, I was standing there in the shower, completely caught off guard, and the next, well, we kissed. Just a brief kiss at first, hesitant, like neither of us knew what we were doing. But then it deepened. There was so much heat between us, it was overwhelming. I hadn't expected it, hadn't thought about Jeremy in that way before, but there was something about the situation, the intensity of it all, that just pulled me in. Then, just as quickly as it started, it stopped. He pulled away, his face flushed with panic, and he bolted out of the bathroom without saying a word. I stood there, under the water, trying to make sense of what had just happened. I finished my shower in a daze. My mind was racing, and I couldn't focus on anything. What had just happened? Why hadn't I stopped it? And more importantly, why hadn't he? I dried off, got dressed, and tried to act like nothing had happened as I headed back downstairs. The evening party was about to start, and more guests were arriving. My husband, oblivious to everything, greeted me with a smile and handed me a glass of wine. I tried to push everything that had just happened to the back of my mind and focus on the party. Jeremy, though? He avoided me. He stayed on the other side of the room, laughing and talking with people, but never once made eye contact with me. It was like we were both pretending nothing had happened, even though it felt like the air between us was charged with tension. Alex, of course, was his usual self, completely unaware of the weird energy between his son and me. We chatted, laughed, and reminisced about old times, but every time Jeremy was nearby, I felt this electric pull, like something was unfinished. Later in the night, after most of the guests had gone and the villa was quiet again, I was lying in bed, trying to wrap my head around everything. I couldn't sleep. I kept replaying the scene from earlier in my mind, over and over again. And then I heard it, someone knocking softly at my bedroom door. My heart jumped into my throat. I knew who it was before I even opened the door. It was Jeremy. He looked conflicted, nervous, like he didn't know what he was doing there. He whispered something about wanting to talk, but the way he looked at me said something else entirely. I knew this wasn't just about talking. Before I could even say anything, the door swung open further, and standing right behind Jeremy were Alex and my husband. Time stopped. They both stood there, staring at us, trying to process what they were seeing. Jeremy took a step back, and the room felt like it was closing in on itself. There was a moment of silence where none of us knew what to say, and then Alex spoke, his voice low and filled with confusion. "What's going on here?" I didn't know how to respond. My mind was racing. My husband was looking between me and Jeremy, his expression slowly changing from confusion to something darker, disbelief, maybe even anger. Alex looked like he was trying to piece everything together, his eyes darting between us. I blurted out, "Nothing, it's not what it looks like." But the words felt empty, hollow. Jeremy, to his credit, didn't say a word. He just backed out of the room, his face pale, leaving me standing there to deal with the fallout. Alex, still confused, looked from me to my husband, and I could see the realization slowly dawning on him. My husband, though, stayed quiet. He didn't yell, didn't accuse. He just stood there, looking at me like he didn't know who I was anymore. Finally, he turned and walked out of the room. Alex followed him, shooting me one last confused look before leaving me alone, standing there in the dim light of the bedroom, wondering how everything had gone so horribly wrong. After Alex and my husband left, I stood there for what felt like an eternity. My heart was pounding, and my mind was swirling with every possible scenario of what could happen next. I couldn't even move, I was so paralyzed by fear, guilt, and confusion. What had I done? I was expecting my husband to come back any moment, or worse, Alex to return and demand an explanation. But instead, nothing happened. Silence. The whole villa felt like it was holding its breath, waiting for someone to make the next move. I eventually made my way to bed, but sleep didn't come. Every time I closed my eyes, all I could see was Jeremy at the door and the looks on Alex and my husband's faces. I knew things were about to get really complicated. The next morning, I woke up with a heavy feeling in my chest. My husband wasn't in the room. I didn't know where he had gone, but I assumed he might be down in the kitchen or by the pool. The villa was too quiet, eerily quiet, considering how lively the day before had been. I got dressed slowly, still not sure what I was going to say when I faced him. The whole situation was like an emotional minefield. Should I apologize? Try to explain? Deny everything? When I finally gathered the courage to go downstairs, I found my husband sitting on the patio with a cup of coffee, staring out into the distance. He didn't look angry, just tired. I approached cautiously, waiting for him to say something first. After a few moments of silence, he finally spoke. "Annie, what was that last night?" His voice was calm, too calm. It made me even more nervous. I started, but he cut me off. "I don't need details," he said, still staring out at the horizon. "I just want to know if this is something we need to talk about. Because if it is, we need to deal with it now." I felt a lump in my throat. I couldn't lie to him. I wanted to downplay it, say it was a misunderstanding, but we both knew something had happened. Maybe not physically, but emotionally, there was definitely something there between me and Jeremy, and my husband had seen enough to know it. I don't know, I finally said, my voice barely above a whisper. It wasn't planned. It just happened. I don't know what to tell you. He took a deep breath and stood up, turning to face me. His expression wasn't angry, but it was heavy with disappointment. Annie, I've loved you for a long time, but if there's something you're not telling me, I need to know. I don't want to go down a path where we're both pretending things are fine. I opened my mouth to say something, but before I could, we both heard footsteps behind us. Jeremy. Jeremy stood there awkwardly, clearly unsure of what to do. He looked at my husband, then at me, and for a moment, the three of us were frozen in this unbearable tension. It was like the weight of the previous night was hanging in the air, pressing down on all of us. Jeremy, my husband said, his voice sharp, do you have something to say? Jeremy hesitated, glancing at me with a look that was almost pleading. I could tell he didn't know whether to admit what happened or try to protect me. But before I could step in, Jeremy spoke. I'm sorry, he said, his voice shaky. It was my fault. I shouldn't have been there. I didn't mean for things to get weird, and I didn't want to cause any problems. I don't know what I was thinking. My husband crossed his arms, studying Jeremy closely. So you're saying this was all you? Jeremy nodded, clearly nervous. Yes, it was. Annie didn't do anything wrong. I was the one who... Stop, I interrupted, unable to let him take all the blame. That's not true. It wasn't just you, Jeremy. We're both at fault. I could feel my husband's eyes on me, and I braced myself for what was coming next. Before my husband could respond, the sliding door behind us opened again. This time, it was Alex. Great. This was about to get even more complicated. He stepped outside, clearly having heard at least part of the conversation. His eyes were on Jeremy, but there was no anger, just disappointment, and maybe a hint of sadness. He looked like a father trying to make sense of his son's actions. Jeremy, Alex said, his voice calm but firm, why don't you go inside for a minute? I need to talk to Annie and her husband alone. Jeremy opened his mouth to protest, but Alex shot him a look that said there was no room for negotiation. Jeremy gave me one last glance before retreating inside. Once he was gone, Alex turned to me, his expression unreadable. What the hell happened last night? I swallowed hard, unsure how to respond. Before I could say anything, Alex continued. Look, I know my son. He's young, and he's impulsive. But this isn't just about him, is it? I couldn't meet his eyes. I felt so guilty, like I'd betrayed not just my husband, but Alex too. He was my best friend, and now I'd crossed a line that I couldn't uncross. It wasn't supposed to happen, I finally said, my voice cracking. I don't even know how to explain it. Alex looked at my husband, then back at me. I'm not here to yell at anyone. I just want to understand what's going on, because if this is something more than a mistake, we need to address it. My husband, who had been quiet this whole time, finally spoke up. We're not going to blow this up into something it's not, he said, surprising me with how calm he sounded. But I need to know where we stand. There we were, the four of us, stuck in this uncomfortable, impossible situation. I couldn't believe how quickly things had spiraled out of control. One impulsive moment in the shower had led to this mess, and now I had to face the consequences. I love you, I said to my husband, my voice thick with emotion. I do. I don't want to lose what we have. But something happened, and I'm sorry. He looked at me, and for a moment, I thought he might walk away. But instead, he took my hand. We'll work through this, he said quietly, his voice steady. But you need to be honest with me. No more secrets. I nodded, tears welling up in my eyes. I didn't deserve his kindness, but I was grateful for it. Alex, who had been watching the whole exchange, finally spoke. I'll talk to Jeremy, he said. He needs to understand that this kind of thing has consequences. But I don't think he's fully to blame here. I nodded, feeling the weight of his words. I'll talk to him too. The rest of the day was tense but calm. My husband and I talked more about what had happened, and though it wasn't an easy conversation, we agreed to work on our marriage. He was hurt, but he wasn't ready to give up on us. As for Jeremy, he avoided me for the rest of the trip. I didn't blame him. He was probably as confused and embarrassed as I was. Alex and I kept things cordial, but our friendship was definitely strained. We hadn't crossed any lines that couldn't be mended, but it would take time for things to feel normal again. In the end, the villa party that was supposed to be a celebration of my birthday turned into something far more complicated. I had to face the reality of my own actions and deal with the consequences, but I was lucky to have a husband who was willing to stand by me, even when things got messy.